Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG. For today's video, I have a deck tech for you guys. It's been a while since I've done a deck tech here on the channel, and I've been really enjoying this standard format so far, and so I really wanted to put together some sort of a standard deck for today. And I ended up going up with Izzet Aggro. It's kind of something we haven't really been seeing too much of. We've been seeing the mono red aggro list, we've been seeing the mono blue aggro list, and we've been seeing the Izzet Crackling Drake, Enigma Drake spells deck. I'm really enjoying, you guys can see here from the next slide, I'm really enjoying the mono red deck and I'm really enjoying the mono blue deck. I like the aggressive elements of both of them, and so I wanted to make just a very aggressive deck. I'm enjoying playing aggressive decks right now in this format. I know they can sometimes not have the best matchup against Golgari, but they can still sometimes steal wins from them. They have decent matchups against all of the control decks, and then even things like mono green. Mono green usually has a good matchup against the red deck, but not necessarily a great matchup against the blue deck. So we're kind of taking some of the parts that are good from each of them, turning it into just like the most aggressive deck that I could possibly make up, because I'm really enjoying the aggressive elements of both of these decks. And I think this next slide will show you what I mean by taking the most aggressive elements. So from the red deck, we have a card like Viashino Pyromancer, and from the blue deck, we have a card like Mistcloaked Herald. Pyromancer is going to come down, deal 2 damage right away, possibly do a little bit more damage through some attacking. Mistcloaked Herald is going to just be chipping away for 1 damage each turn, possibly a little bit more, depending on what else we do with the Mistcloaked Herald. But these are just really, really aggressive cards in these two decks, and we're kind of the focal point of me wanting to play with this. I've had a lot of practice with the mono red deck, not quite so much practice with the mono blue deck, but I do enjoy both of them. And from my experience playing the mono red deck, Viashino Pyromancer has just become like one of my favorite cards. This card is just so good. For especially for a common, like it makes me just want to go play some sort of a popper deck with Viashino Pyromancer in it. But I'm enjoying it enough here in standard that I don't even need to go make a popper deck with it. So these are 4 copies of each of these creatures, and something else you're going to see for the first 32 cards that I'm going to show you here. It's just 8 different cards that we're all running a playset of. So these are very consistent decks that we're talking about here, where we're just running a lot of the same, copies of cards, nothing too crazy where we're throwing in one of here, a couple 2-ofs here, that sort of thing. A lot of these cards are just 4-ofs, and it's very consistent when you go through and play with it. Here we have the next set of creatures: Warkite Marauder, Gitu Lava Runner, and Siren Storm Tamer. Gitu Lava Runner, again, is just a very aggressive 1-drop here in red. Works well with the instants and sorceries that we'll talk about later on. Siren Storm Tamer, a bit expensive for an uncommon. It's like a $5 uncommon right now, which is kind of crazy, but it is a key point or a key part, I should say, to this deck. A 1-mana 1/1 with evasion, fantastic for this aggressive little deck. Sometimes can have the ability to counter a spell or ability if we need it to, and then also has the wizard subtype, which is something that we'll talk about later on as well. Warkite Marauder is just a card that I think is good enough for this deck. I don't want to say skeptical on it, that's not the word that I should be choosing here, but it was one of the cards that I thought about cutting, I guess I should say, from this deck. I didn't know if a 2/1 would be, or a 2/1 flyer for 2 would be aggressive enough for what I was really looking to do here. In the end, I think it is, and having the ability to turn other creatures into an 0/1 also works pretty well with some of the burn spells that we're running. If our opponent has the play and we have the draw, they go like turn 3 Steel Leaf Champion or whatever. We're up against Mono Green, for example. They play Steel Leaf Champion. We can go Warkite Marauder, turn it into an 0/1, and then use some sort of a burn spell to take care of the Steel Leaf Champion, which is something that we normally would have a a huge problem with if we were playing the mono red version of the deck. So I think Warkite Marauder does give us a lot of game in the matchups where we're not normally favored. It gives us the ability to at least have a little bit of game there and possibly even steal some of those matchups. So these are all of our creatures. There are 5 different 4-ofs that we're running for the creature base, and then we're on to the spells. And something I really, really like about this deck in particular, as well as just the mono red decks, is that there's so many good burn spells in the format right now. So we're running 4 Shock, 4 Lightning Strike, 4 Wizard's Lightning. We have a total of 12 Wizards in the deck to turn on Wizard's Lightning. We have the 4 Pyromancers, the 4 Gitu Lava Runners, as well as the 4 Siren Storm Tamers. So a total of 12 Wizards to turn on our Wizard's Lightning. We're hoping to cast it for 1. If we have to cast it for 3, that's still not the end of the world. But most of the time we'll be able to cast it for 1, which is super cool. So we have this nice little burn package here that later on in the game we can, use these to just go to our opponent's face if we have to just finish off our opponent early on in the game. If we want to get some more damage through on the ground, we can just, shock a small creature, get through with a few more points of damage. Again, like I was saying with Warkite Marauder, we can shrink a creature into an 0/1 and then use one of these burn spells to get rid of it. For example, something like a Nullhide Ferox is another card that we have a problem with. So being able to do something like pay 2 mana to remove its hexproof ability, Warkite Marauder it so that it's down to an 0/1 and then just shock it to get rid of it. That's a very efficient way for us to remove a powerful threat that's very good against our deck. So I'm very happy with how this deck ended up turning out in terms of being able to deal with creatures that we normally wouldn't be able to deal with in these types of strategies. Onto the next set of cards. These ones are essentially card draw spells. We have 1 copy of Chart a Course, 2 Risk Factor, and 2 Curious Obsession. Curious Obsession, again, is part of the mono red or the mono blue deck, I should say. Not at its best here, where we have slightly less evasive creatures, but on all of our blue creatures, it's still just a fantastic card to put onto all of them. Gives us a little bit of card draw, as well as giving +1/+1, so we're getting in a little bit of additional damage there as well. Not quite good enough for us to run a 4 up here, again, because it's only really good on 12 of our creatures instead of all 20, so it's still just a perfectly fine card, but not something we want to run 4 of in this deck. Risk Factor is probably just the best Punisher card that I've seen printed in the past, several years in Magic. This card is fantastic. This card is one of the most expensive cards in the deck right now at like $10 a piece, which is crazy. But it's a very good card, and it's been living up to that price tag. Whenever I play this card, it seems so good. Early on in the game, we can use this as an instant speed 3 mana 4 damage removal spell, because normally they won't want to give us the cards. If they do want to give us the cards, our deck is very cheap, so we can just maybe draw a land and 2 more 1-drops, or a land and 2 more 2-drops, and then we can just empty out our hand again, jumpstart the Risk Factor, see if they want to give us more cards, see if they just want to take some damage, and then Chart a Course again, just another way for us to draw a few more cards here. Nothing too crazy, which is why we're only running a 1 of. I think in most situations, Chart a Course is going to end up being the first card that you'll sideboard out. It's similar to Opt in most situations. You'll, or I guess I should say Opt in Limited. When you play Opt in Limited, most of the time you will just sideboard out the Opt right away. If you need, like, if you find any sideboard card that's better than, that's like good in the matchup, the first card you take out is Opt, because it just doesn't do enough. It's a good card to have in game 1, but just doesn't do enough in game 2. And so I think Chart a Course is going to be that same kind of card for us, where as soon as we get to game 2, we know what cards we want to sideboard in. If we need to make a cut, Chart a Course is probably just going to be the first card to be cut. But still, 2 mana to draw 2 cards, perfectly fine for us. The discard a card isn't too bad. We could discard a Risk Factor, jumpstart it later, or just use it to discard another land, because we are fairly light on lands, but we don't need that many lands. So if we end up flooding out, then just discarding a land isn't the worst case scenario either. Onto the last set of spells here in the main board, we have Ionize and we have Banefire. 3 copies of Ionize here as a nice little tempo swing. We can counter a spell, still get through 2 damage, and then attack back the next turn. And then 1 copy of Banefire, again, just another burn spell. We have so much burn in this deck that we can just, target our opponent with, and Banefire is a nice way of, even if we do flood out, we can go ahead and play out those lands. Banefire is a good way to just get through additional damage. So it's very, very nice having the 1 Banefire in here. If we end up facing, something like Shalai, for example. Shalai is one of the cards that we are worst against, so you'll actually see that when we get to the sideboard. Having these cards to be able to deal with Shalai is super important. Banefire, Exit would have to equal 4 to deal with Shalai. Ionize, we could just counter it if we're on the play or the draw, doesn't matter. We hold up the 3 mana to counter the Shalai. So yeah, it's a pretty solid deck. We're only running 3 Ionize in the main and 1 Banefire in the main, but you'll see that we have the additional 4th Ionize and an additional 2nd Banefire in the sideboard as well. So yeah, without further ado, we'll go ahead and talk about, we'll talk about the mana base first. I was going to say we'll talk about the sideboard, but we'll talk about the mana base. 4 Steam Vents, 4 Sulfur Falls. I think Steam Vents being printed is what really makes this deck viable. We have so many different 1-drops that are, different colors, so Sometimes we'll want to be able to play Siren Storm Tamer or Mistcloaked Herald on turn 1, while other times we'll want to be playing Gitu Lava Runner or holding up Shock on turn 1, and so Steam Vents is a vital part in us being able to do that. And because we're super aggressive, we're going to have our opponents defeated before the 2 life matters that we do to ourselves, so Steam Vents is a very important card for us to have here. Sulfur Falls sometimes enters tapped. We're hoping it doesn't enter tapped too often, but if it does, you know, that's like worst case scenario, but still not too bad. Then we're on to the basic lands, 5 islands, 6 mountains, and that is your mana base. Very simple, 4 of, 4 of, 5 of, 6 of, nice simple mana base, and now we are on to the sideboard. So for the sideboard here, we're looking at 15 cards. I tried to pick out 15 cards that I thought would work well in the current metagame, as well as just focusing on the weaknesses of the deck, which is normally what your sideboard is supposed to do. But of course, if you're planning on putting together this deck in paper, try to, you know, put together a sideboard for your current meta. If you're just planning on playing at your local game store, then, you know, figure out what people are playing at your game store, make a sideboard accordingly. This is going to be if you're planning on playing on something like Arena or Magic Online, something along those lines, then this would be a good place for this would be a decent sideboard for you to start with. Alright, so getting into the sideboard, like I said, one of the cards we struggle with the most is Shalai, Voice of Plenty, so these are some removal spells we have to deal with Shalai. 3 Lava Coil ends up defeating Shalai. 1 Fight with Fire, that can end up beating Shalai as well. Fight with Fire also hits something like Lyra Dawnbringer, which is another card that we would struggle with as well. So just some decent removal spells for the bigger creatures that we have trouble dealing with. Fight with Fire, chances of us kicking Fight with Fire are basically 2% probably, maybe even less than 2%. Chances of us kicking it are just extremely low because we're not playing a ton of lands. If we ever do get to kick it, we're winning the game. It doesn't really matter what the situation is for us. If we ever get to kick it, we're winning the game. But yeah, it's mainly just there to deal with the big 5 toughness creatures thing, or even 4 toughness creatures in Shalai's case again. But cards like Shalai, Lyra Dawnbringer, Steelleaf Champion, those kind of cards, we would want to bring in these to deal with those creatures. Then we have some additional creatures on our sideboard as well. Direfleet Daredevil is one that we can bring in against other decks that are running instants and sorceries, trying to get a little bit of value out of those, as well as just getting a 2/1 first striker, which is pretty nice. And then Nightveil Spectre, in the games where we're trying to accumulate a little bit of value, the Surveil can actually be really nice, as well as getting through some additional damage as well. The mono blue tempo decks end up running Nightveil Sprite in the main. I'm not enough of a fan of it. I'd rather play the Warkite Marauders in the main over the Nightveil Sprites, but sometimes the Nightveil Sprites can just be pretty nice with their Surveil ability. So we have them in the side. The other card that I was really considering for the Nightveil Sprite slot was something like Tetsuko Umezawa or something like River Sneak as well. Some unblockable damage to get through, but I ended up choosing Nightveil Sprite just because I like that it can accumulate some value with the Surveil ability. Onto the next set of cards, we have some counter spells, 4 Spell Pierce and 1 Ionize. I like Spell Pierce in this deck because we're trying to defeat our opponents very fast, so holding up 1 mana is significantly easier for us than holding up 3 mana like it would be for Ionize, or even 4 mana like it would be for some of the other counter spells. So Spell Pierce is going to be a fantastic card for us in this deck, and that's why we're running 4 of in the sideboard for the matchups where that matters. We have the additional Ionize here as well, which brings us up to 4 Ionize. I don't quite know one matchup yet we really want the 4th Ionize, but Ionize is just a fantastic card, so maybe if you just are running out of cards in the main deck, or you have enough cards in the main deck that you think are bad in the current matchup, then you can bring in the Ionize as just a card that would be better than the bad cards in your main deck for the matchup. So that's an example of where you might bring in the 4th Ionize. If you have to, you know, if you want to change up the sideboard, of course, the 4th Ionize could be something that you could change out as well. Onto the next card we have here. This is sideboard card number 14. We have the second Banefire, like I talked about earlier. This one, again, just an additional source of damage. Another way for us to deal with cards like Shalai and Lyra as well, if we can get enough lands out to deal with those creatures. And then the final card we have in the sideboard is the 3rd copy of Risk Factor. In the matchups where we want some additional card draw, Risk Factor is just a fantastic way to do it, as well as just being an additional case of burn. Very, very good card. I'm very impressed with playing with Risk Factor so far. Much more impressed than I ever thought I would be with this card. I'm pleasantly surprised, and now I'm pleasantly surprised enough to be making a deck with it. This card's just card's really good, and yeah, I'm very surprised, but it's fantastic. So this has been the deck. That's the last sideboard card here. So of course I would like to thank you guys all so much for watching. If you guys have any questions about the deck, any opinions on the deck, be sure to let me know down below in the comment section as well. And I'll see you guys here next time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like if you guys did enjoy. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new, and I will see you guys here next time for another Magic the Gathering video. Thank you guys so much for watching today's deck tech, where we talked about Izzet Aggro, which is a nice little deck that I made up. Hopefully you guys did enjoy it. At the end of all of my videos, I love to give a huge shout out and thank you to my patrons over on the Patreon page. Jayathy Swarren, Daniel, Jeremy, Badwolf MTG, and Jason support me over on the Patreon page. I'm extremely, extremely thankful for them for doing so. It's super cool to know that I have people supporting me over there. It's this crazy feeling, knowing that people enjoy my content enough to support me over there. It's super crazy. Even if you don't support me over there, I still love you all the same. Just likes on the video, subscribing to the channel, it still means the world to me, and so I can't say thank you enough. But without further ado, I'll see you guys here next time for another video. Enjoy the rest of your day.